such a common and such a major problem in the intensive care units of all the ICUs in the world today. The objectives of this presentation is that we will learn the importance of ventilator associated pneumonia, we will know the definition, we will see the epidemiology and the risk factors. More importantly, we will look at the possible ways in which we can diagnose it, and of course, above everything we will know how to treat, what are the management strategies, and how do we prevent ventilator associated pneumonias. So, if you look at the varying studies which have come out in the world, it has shown that the incidence and crude mortality rates associated with ventilator associated pneumonias is a very high one, and right from 1990 to the early 2000s, it has shown variable but high incidence of both of the incidence as well as the mortality of ventilator associated pneumonias. Now, the reason why it has shown variable incidence we will allude to in a short while from now, but when we assess the attributable mortality to VAP as compared to the matched case control studies, then we realize that nosocomial pneumonia is a major contributor to the death in the intensive care units. And amongst the various intensive care units, the National Nosocomial Infection Surveillance Study had shown that the neurosurgical ICU has a higher incidence of ventilator associated pneumonias as compared to some other ICUs like the coronary care, etc., for obvious reasons that these are more sicker patients, they are unconscious, they are highly likely to have tracheotomies and been on longer term mechanical ventilators. So, if we start off with the definition of what is a ventilator associated pneumonia, theoretically it is obviously an inflammation of the lung parenchyma caused by infectious agents which are not present or incubating when the mechanical ventilation was started. So, that is the word wise definition of ventilator associated pneumonia, but they are then divided into two types, early onset and late onset. Essentially they have to start off more than 48 to 72 hours after the tracheal intubation, and the early onset ones are those which are occurring within the first 4 days after intubation, and the late onset ones are those which are occurring 5 or more days after intubation, and the differentiation is made primarily because the early onset VAPs are likely to have a better prognosis and they are likely to have more antibiotic sensitive bacteria, but those who are late onset are the ones which have come 4-5 days or more after their intubation, which means that they have received some antimicrobials, they have been in the intensive care units for a longer period of time, and then therefore are more likely to have been caused by multi-drug resistant pathogens. If you go to the CDC definitions, the Clinical Infectious Disease publication has shown two different terminologies. One is VAP and the other is HAP, and the HAP is the hospital acquired pneumonia. It refers to the development of parenchymal lung infection after at least 48 hours of hospitalization, and the VAP is the development of parenchymal lung infection after the patient has undergone intubation and received mechanical ventilation for at least 48 hours. So, essentially the differentiation is on the basis of intubation and mechanical ventilation, and if you then make an attempt to give a clinical definition, because finally we are all clinicians and we are looking at the clinical ways of making a diagnosis, then these are new or progressive radiographic parenchymal lung infiltrates and signs that these infiltrates are of infectious origins. So, those signs are obviously high temperature, high WBC count, purulent sputum or new onset of purulent sputum or of endotracheal aspirate, and the CDC uses supplemental clinical findings in terms of altered mental status, increasing in respiratory secretions, new onset of dyspnea, new onset of RALs and bronchial breath sounds, and obviously then we have microbiological criteria of making a diagnosis in the form of positive blood culture, positive pleural fluid culture if there is an associated pleural collection significant enough to be drained, and positive results from bronchoalveolar lavage, or histological evidence of pneumonia, which is a hypothetical thing, or more than 5% intracellular bacteria on gram stain as demonstrated in a bronchoalveolar lavage specimen. When we look at the epidemiology of ventilator associated pneumonia from an Indian perspective, this was a very elegant study which got published in the Indian Journal in 2014, and it showed that the incidence of VAP is quite high, 57.14%, and a lot of underlying clinical conditions had contributed significantly. Neurological illnesses, trauma, COPD, respiratory failure, poisoning, etc., had contributed to it. And if you look at the microorganisms which were contributing to the development of ventilator associated pneumonia in the Indian study, the commonest was Acinetobacter, a very high percentage to the tune of 33%. Then came the Pseudomonas, and then came the other agents like Klebsiella or E. coli or Staphylococcus aureus, etc. So, a very significant contribution made by gram negative organisms, and those two also multi-drug resistant gram negative organisms. This also was the part of the study which got published in IJCCM in 2014. So, when we say that intubation contributes significantly and increases the risk of development of pneumonia by ranging from 3 times to 21 times, isn't it that we should be calling it more intubation associated pneumonia? More so because non-invasive ventilation is supposed to have a lesser incidence of ventilator associated pneumonia, which means that it is predominantly the intubation, and as a result of which we are overcoming the natural barrier for prevention of protection of the upper airways. That is what contributes to the development of ventilator associated pneumonias. So, the risk factors for pneumonia are increased age, severity of the underlying illness in the form of respiratory failure, etc. The ARDS patients are more highly prone to develop ventilator associated pneumonias. The COPD patients are also highly prone to develop ventilator associated pneumonias. Presence of sinusitis, presence of intubation, especially if there is a nasal intubation, nasogastric tube if it has been there for a prolonged period of time, presence of high gastric residue and increased pH in the gastric secretions. These are all some of the risk factors for the development of ventilator associated pneumonias, and the Indian studies also looked at the various risk factors associated with the ventilator associated pneumonias, and they were more or less same as compared to the international data in the form of mechanical ventilation, re-intubations, intravenous sedation, prolonged sedation, prior antibiotic therapy, impaired consciousness, tracheostomies, supine head position, neurological disorders, etc., etc. Now, the problems with the diagnosis and the dilemmas associated with ventilator associated pneumonias are quite significant. First and foremost, the clinical diagnosis is fairly non-specific and therefore is quite difficult, and I will allude to in a moment. The technologies or the techniques which confirm the diagnosis are essentially going to be the techniques which finally give us the microbiological contribution, in the sense that we tend to know what are the organisms which tend to cause it, and there are various methodologies of doing these techniques, either non-bronchoscopic or bronchoscopic, and either qualitative or quantitative, and the best are of course the quantitative cultures over and above everything. And let us see all these things in details. Let us look at the clinical pictures. The clinical definition is of infiltrates with fever or leukocytosis or a purulent sputum, and the infiltrate in a patient who is already on mechanical ventilator could be because of different things like a pulmonary edema, ARDS, atelectasis, contusion, thromboemboli, effusions, and no feature has more than 65% predictive ability. The fever and leukocytosis in an intensive care unit could be caused by many other pathologies other than ventilator associated pneumonias, and purulent sputum does not necessarily mean ventilator associated pneumonia. It could be because of a tracheobronchitis or reactive airway, and therefore, the clinical definition is fairly non-specific. And if all these features, if we look at the people who have actually got ventilator associated pneumonias, these features can only predict 50% of the times whether the patient can have pneumonia or not. What about the investigatory modalities? The chest imaging and the microscopical analysis are the ones which are on our list after the clinical suspicion is raised, and amongst these you can see that the chest imaging again is fairly non-specific, and we finally have to depend on microscopic analysis of these patients. So, a score has been developed, and this is known as clinical pulmonary infection scores. This got developed in the year 2000, and a review of that came out in 2014 and has shown various components and have given the markings as 0, 1 and 2. For example, temperature above 36.5 and less than 38.4 has only 0 score. 2 if there is a significant hyper or hypothermia, and so on and so forth. So, points have been given for temperature, white cell count, tracheal secretions, oxygenation status, infiltrates on the chest X-ray, progression of infiltrates and tracheal aspiration culture, and all these have been given 0, 1 and 2, and if you have a score of more than 6, then it is considered as significant and diagnostic of the modified clinical infection, clinical pulmonary infection score. A modified clinical pulmonary infection score of more than 6 at baseline, or over a period of 72 hours progressing to above 7 is indicative of a ventilator associated pneumonia, as evidenced in various studies done on this behalf. So, basically the clinical pulmonary infection score raises the clinical possibility and gives you a very good clinical indication of the possibility of this being a ventilator associated pneumonia. Obviously, there are other criteria like the modified CDC criteria for diagnosis of VAP, and they are looking again at fever, leukopenia, new onset of purulent sputum, worsening gas exchange, recent onset of cough, dyspnea or new onset of rales, and signs of consolidation, etc., etc. So, essentially we looked at them some time ago, and they are the same ones. Beyond this, you need to make a microbiological diagnosis, and the microbiological diagnosis essentially depends on showing the organisms from various sites which possibly can be harbored. One is of course the positivity of blood cultures, then diagnostic thoracocentesis if there is an associated pleural effusion which is significant enough to be tapped without any risk, and of course, finally in majority of situation it amounts to culture of respiratory secretions. Now, routine culture of sputum does not differentiate an infection versus colonization, and therefore, it is not recommended unless the clinical pulmonary infection score is high, and then there is a significant clinical suspicion of the pathology being a ventilator associated pneumonia. If we do just a gram stain of tracheal aspirates or a gram stain of the bowel fluid, then this procedure has a moderate sensitivity in 82% of situations, but a very low specificity. This is talking about tracheal aspirate. But if you do a gram stain of the bowel bronchoalveolar lavage fluid, then again the 51% of the times we will be able to get into full agreement with the bronchoscopic protected samples cultures, and 39% of the time there will be a partial concordance. So, essentially a gram stain either of the tracheal aspirate per se or preferably a bronchoalveolar lavage specimen would be a reasonably good way of finding out the microbiological diagnosis of ventilator associated pneumonias. Now, obviously, the qualitative cultures have lesser value as compared to the quantitative cultures either of tracheal aspirates or bronchoalveolar lavage, and the deeper you go in trying to get these cultures from, that means that if you do it from a bronchoalveolar lavage specimen or a protected bronchoscopy specimen, or for a non-bronchoscopic aspirate or from aspirate from trachea, you will need higher number of organisms in order to make the diagnosis. For a tracheal aspirate, it is said that you need more than 10 raised to 6, and if you have a protected bronchoscopic sample, then you need only more than 10 raised to 3, because it is so much specific at the site from which it is coming. And therefore, this is the way, if you get these number of organisms being positive in the culture, then this is a very good way of making a diagnosis in a quantified manner. These microbial cultures, either of endotracheal aspirates or of distal specimens, are good enough only if there is a quantification, and the qualitative analysis is of little value. So, essentially, in order to make a broad generalization, clinical and radiological testing can't rule ventilator associated pneumonia in or out, and distal bronchial microbiology is the best, but they are delayed. The results take some time to come, and therefore, in the interim the bronchoalveolar lavage cytology may be a very good supportive evidence in addition to the high clinical pulmonary infection scores, and in future perhaps the biochemistry in the form of TREM may allow early diagnosis in these patients. The invasive methods, obviously in the form of bronchoalveolar lavage etc., are expensive, they require expertise, and there are rarely complications also. However, the advantage is that they make a better selection of antibiotics, they can give you a better knowledge of microbiology in the ICU, and they help us in proper selection of antibiotics and help in de-escalation possible. So, if you go in a graded manner by a clinical pulmonary infection score alone, you get a 60% sensitivity and about the same percentage of specificity, but if you add the bronchoalveolar lavage gram stain, the sensitivity shoots up to 85%, but the specificity goes down to about 50%, and then a protected sample gram stain is of similar value. And therefore, you might look in a graded manner. First you look at the suspicion raised by a CDC criteria being positive, then you do a clinical pulmonary infection scores, then add a gram stain made on bronchoalveolar lavage, and then you send these cytology for a few further analysis in the form of quantitative bile cultures. And these then will increase your sensitivity and specificity. For example, if the CPI score is more than 6 and the bile gram stain is positive, then your sensitivity is 85%. The post test probability of ventilator associated pneumonia then becomes 65%, and if you then show the bile positive bile fluid to have more than 5% of cells, the sensitivity goes up to 90%, and the post test probability of development of VAP goes up to 91%. So, go in a graded manner, do the go by the CDC criteria, develop the clinical pulmonary infection scores, do a bronchoalveolar lavage gram stain, and that should be a good enough starting point to decide whether you want to make a appropriate selection of antibiotics or not. Similarly, if you have a negative predictability also can be judged from the same methodology of progression in the form of doing the CPI score, looking at the bile gram stain positivity, and then doing a gram stain culture. So, what is the current guidelines in terms of etiological diagnosis? Blood cultures to be done in all the cases, this is level 2 evidence. Sample of lower respiratory tract to be obtained, level 2 evidence again, and this is in the form of tracheal aspirate, bronchoalveolar lavage specimens, brushings or non-bronchoscopic bronchoalveolar lavage. In the presence of large pleural effusion, diagnostic thoracocentesis can be done or should be done, but there is only level 3 evidence, and no respiratory secretion testing is required in the absence of clinical evidence of VAP. This is important. If you do not suspect clinically that there is a likelihood of VAP, then you do not need to make analysis of the respiratory secretion. So, the invasive diagnosis evidences and recommendations stand in the form of qualitative cultures lead to therapy for more organisms as compared to qualitative cultures. There is level 1 recommendation, level 1 evidence. Non-bronchoscopic bronchoalveolar lavage can be used to obtain reliable samples for quantitative cultures, and sterile cultures of respiratory secretions in the absence of new antibiotics in the last 3 days virtually rules out bacterial pneumonias, although viral, fungal and legionnaire are still possible. And in ARDS, the deterioration in oxygenation and hemodynamic instability are also important for making a diagnosis. The bacteriological strategy overall in the form of making an aspirate, either a bronchoalveolar lavage or a tracheal aspirate, and doing a quantitative culture is important because it emphasizes the prevention of over treatment and make sure that we use the antibiotic therapy in a lower and narrower spectrum and in judicious manner. The higher incidence of false negative cultures will mean that antibiotic therapy especially results in false negatives, and therefore, will lead us to appropriate strategies. There has been no difference found in the mortality between strategies which have been invasive or non-invasive. However, the selection of antibiotics, the development of antibiotic resistance and appropriate use has been significantly improved in making the appropriate strategies based on invasive microbiological diagnosis. Now, after having made this diagnosis or suspected this diagnosis, what are the treatment strategies that we should be considering? First and foremost, understand that there are 2 types of ventilator associated pneumonias, the early onset of and the late onset, as we defined in the initial phase, when the early onset is between 48 hours to 4 days after intubation and mechanical ventilation, and the late onset is beyond 5 days. And the common reason for differentiating, as I mentioned, was that the common causative organisms for early onset VAP are methicillin sensitive staph, Streptococcus, Haemophilus, Moraxella, etc., and the late onset are the typical ICU residents in the form of Pseudomonas acinetobacter, Enterobacter species, MRSAs and so on and so forth. And the way the treatment goes on is that essentially once you make a diagnosis, you have to go over to an empiric therapy after trying to obtain the specimen. Now, when you suspect VAP, the algorithm is that you decide whether it is a late onset or whether it is an early onset. If it is early onset, then we need to choose on the limited spectrum antibiotic therapy, and if it is a late onset, then based on the risk factors for MDR pathogens, you if there are MDR pathogens, then you choose broad spectrum antibiotics for MDR pathogens for the late onset VAP. This is the broad guideline for selection of antibiotic empirical therapy. The potential pathogens for the early onset, as I mentioned, was MSSA, Streptococcus haemophilus, and therefore ceftriaxone, ampicillin sulbactam, levofloxacin or other quinolones are the standard recommended antibiotics for these early onset VAPs, where the late onset VAPs are likely to be antibiotic methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, antibiotic sensitive enteric gram negative bacilli like E. coli, Klebsiella, Enterobacter, or MDR pathogens in the form of Pseudomonas, Klebsiella or Acinetobacter, or MRSAs or Legionellas. And therefore, the combination antibiotic therapy in the form of anti-pseudomonal cephalosporin, which is the 4th generation, or anti-pseudomonal carbapenems plus anti-pseudomonal fluoroquinolones or aminoglycosides are recommended in such situations. I think the best way to look at it is from the Indian ICU perspective, primarily because our organisms are predominantly in the late onset VAPs are predominantly MDR gram negatives, and in the early onset they are again predominantly gram negatives. Some of them, majority of them are not so MDRs, and therefore, the early onset VAPs in Indian ICUs are best treated with a third generation cephalosporin like ceftriaxone for example, or a BL-BLI combination, the beta-lactam plus beta-lactamase inhibitor combination like piperacillin tazobactam or cefoperazone sulbactam, etc. Quinolones, ertapenums, etc. are also recommended. For the late onset, which are predominantly due to organisms which are multi-drug resistance, the organisms preferred are carbapenems, especially if the patients are extremely unwell, or you could try a BL-BLI combination if the patient is not so unwell, and if you are definite or if you land up into or if you have data showing that you have many multi-drug higher incidence of multi-drug resistant strains, then you have to start thinking of colistin right at the initial phase. The official recommendations in the guidelines for antibiotic selection for VAP is that first and foremost initial therapy has to be given intravenously. Agents such as quinolones and linezolid can be switched to oral therapy, obviously those which are available in oral form. Aerosolized antibiotics have unproven value as adjunctive therapy, and aminoglycoside should be stopped after 5 to 7 days in the responding patients. Mortality varies obviously if the initial selection is appropriate versus initial selection being inappropriate. For those patients who have initial selection which is inappropriate, there is very high mortality as evidenced by various studies done over a significant period of time. And in Indian ICUs there is a significant data to show that multi-drug resistant strains are the predominant strains, and therefore, for Indian ICUs an early selection of an antimicrobial agents which can cover the MDRs is quite a significant and an important one. The next question is of duration of therapy. In the responding patient, the antibiotic should be given only for 7 to 8 days, and there are enough number of studies which have shown that by continuing these antibiotics for a longer period of time, you only end up producing antibiotic resistant strains or fungal superinfections in the ICU. The longer duration may perhaps be justified only in certain clinical scenarios, and that too very rarely, and that is in patients who have not responded clinically, who have cavitations, who have gram-negative necrotizing pneumonias, initial inappropriate therapy, multilobar infections, isolation of Pseudomonas or Acinetobacter, especially multi-resistant strains, etc., etc. But mind you, please remember that this prolonged therapy will lead to colonization with resistant bacteria and may produce fungal superinfection also. So, the issues in antibiotic therapy other than the selection and the timing and the duration are of combination therapy. Combination therapy has not shown any evidence in routine patients, but in patients who have multi-drug resistant strains, it tends to cover up for all the likely antibiotics which can be to which the organism can be found to be sensitive. So, your likely hit rate is higher if you combine and also in immunocompromised patients. But monotherapy obviously is cheaper, does not expose the patient to too many antibiotics, and with early onset VAPs or milder forms of VAPs, it is reasonably highly successful. And combination therapy may be converted to monotherapy if dictated by culture results over a period of time, which is what we call as de-escalation. Topical antibiotics in the form of instillation or aerosol use have shown improved microbiological eradication, but unfortunately no change in the mortality, and therefore may be useful for organisms with very high MICs as an adjuvant agent to the intravenous use, especially for those who are unresponsive to systemic therapy. When we have given these started these antimicrobials, we need to assess for the response to therapy, and usually the clinical response takes over a period of 48 to 72 hours, and therefore, the therapy should not be changed earlier than that, and responding patient should have de-escalation of therapy based on culture data, and the non-responding patient should be evaluated further. The de-escalation strategy of antibiotic therapy, as I mentioned, has the basis in that the high mortality of associated with VAP, if you have started showing that there is been a clinical response, these patients who have a high risk of development of multi-drug resistant strains, if you continue with the same higher antimicrobials, it is possible that you produce over a period of time drug resistant strains, and therefore, de-escalation has been shown to not only reduce mortality in institution of adequate broad spectrum antibiotics, which could be modified in this strategy. If you have a patient who is a non-responder, then the thoughts that you come to your mind are that perhaps you have hit the wrong organism, the pathogen is probably a resistant one, or your initial selection has been inappropriate, or has been given in the wrong dose, or the patient has a viral pneumonia or a fungal pneumonia or a mycobacterial pneumonia. So, wrong organism has been targeted, or there is a wrong diagnosis that this is not a VAP at all. You are probably dealing with a pulmonary embolism or ARDS or a pulmonary hemorrhage or a neoplasm and the underlying pulmonary disease, etc., or there is a complication in the form of empyema or a lung abscess or a C. diff colitis or an occult infection or a drug fever, etc., etc. So, you have to have an appropriate analysis of those patients who are not showing appropriate response to therapy, and then based on this analysis decide on what should be the way to deal with the non-responders. An important aspect of management of VAP is strategies to prevent ventilator associated pneumonias, and they have been divided into general measures, decontamination measures, early extubation and prevention of aspiration. And therefore, the strategies which have been shown to be clinically relevant based on data have been hand washing, preferable use of non-invasive ventilation, avoidance of re-intubation, use of HME filters, avoidance of frequent circuit changes, draining the condensates from circuits, continuous subglottic suction, semi-recumbent positions, post-pyloric feeding, tight glycemic control, restricted transfusion restricted transfusions in these patients, daily chlorhexidine mouthwash, selective decontamination of the digestive tract, early enteral feeding, avoiding of intra-hospital transfers, posture changes by rotating beds, avoidance of malnutrition, oral intubation over the nasal intubation, maintenance of the cuff pressures, and routine perhaps routine prophylactic antibiotics as shown in a Canadian study on comatose patients. So, these have been the strategies which have looked at the prevention of ventilator associated pneumonias. So, the take home messages and the summary of these patients of ventilator associated pneumonia is that if you suspect ventilator associated pneumonia, you should make an attempt to get a lower respiratory tract sample for culture, but unless there is both a low clinical suspicion for pneumonia and a negative microscopy, we should begin early empirical antimicrobial therapy using the algorithm and using the local microbiology data. On day 2 and day 3, we should check for the cultures and assess the clinical response. If there has been a clinical response and the culture has come back negative, we should consider stopping the antibiotic. If the culture has been positive and if there has been a clinical response, we should de-escalate to antibiotics if possible and treat selected patients for a total period of 7 to 8 days and reassess. But if there is no clinical improvement and if the culture is negative, then we should search for other pathogens, complications, other diagnosis and other sites for infection, And if there is no clinical improvement and if the culture comes back positive, then we should adjust the antibiotic therapy based on the culture, and of course, search for other pathogens, complications, other diagnosis and other sites of infections. Strategies to prevent development of VAP should be in place in all ICUs. Either bronchoscopic sampling or non-bronchoscopic techniques can reliably obtain lower respiratory tract cultures, secretions, but they have to be semi-quantitative or quantitative culture data, and that data can be used, especially the quantitative data, to increase the specificity of diagnosis of VAPs and make sure that our choice for antibiotics is appropriate. If high probability of pneumonia